So this story is sensitive to me as it does involve family and death. It took place 5 years ago when my dad was battling stage 4 cancer. He was constantly in and out of the hospital, and it was really tough on our family. And for reference purposes, I was 17 at the time and living at my parents' house. I actually had to pick up extra shifts at my job just to help pay my dad's medical bills because of how high they were, but that's another story. Anyway, I was always visiting my dad in the hospital as often as possible. Stage 4 is very bad, and it was heartbreaking to watch how sick he got in such a short amount of time. I should also note that our next door neighbors have a severely autistic son named Jimmy. He was around 18 at the time, and yes, this information does come into play. It was around 11 at night on a Friday. I had just gotten home from working a double. My mom wasn't home as she was working overnights at her job. I get home, exhausted, and just wanting to go laying in bed when there was a knock at my front door. I looked through our peephole and saw that it was our neighbor, Jimmy. I opened the door and asked what he was doing over here so late. He was shaking and looked super nervous. I asked him again, and then he looked at me and said, "This is your last chance to see your dad alive. Go now." Then before I could respond, he ran off and back over to his house. Something deep in me told me that what Jimmy just told me was real. I grabbed my car keys and rushed over to the hospital. By the time I got there, the doctors informed me that my dad died minutes before I arrived. I was absolutely devastated. After the funeral, and when things calmed down a bit, I saw Jimmy outside in the driveway. I approached him and asked him how he knew my dad was going to die that night. He looked at me with a serious face and said, "The lady who lives in his walls told him so." Ever since Jimmy told me this, I've had a hard time coming to grips with it. I don't know what he meant by the lady who lives in his walls, but I'm inclined to believe it was some sort of spirit or ghost, which I've never really believed in. But how else would he have known about my father dying that night? I still miss my father dearly, and I hope that he's at peace. This story happened when I was in my sophomore year at college. I moved into a one-bedroom off-campus apartment that was definitely an upgrade to the dorm I had the year previously, or so I thought. I wasn't even moved into my apartment for a week when things started to get creepy. One night, I was studying at my desk when I heard glass shatter from my bathroom down the hall. Keep in mind, I lived there alone with no roommates. My first thought was maybe something fell, so I went to check it out. To my surprise, the mirror was shattered into pieces. I looked all around for any kind of explanation, but nothing, just a broken mirror. But the creepiness doesn't stop there. I began to hear strange noises at night, like whispers and giggles that echoed throughout my room. It always happened in the dead of night. Every time I would wake up, I would search my apartment, only to find no source of those voices. It got to the point where I actually thought I was going insane. A few nights after the voices, I was sitting on my bed, working on some assignments, when out of nowhere, the glass of water on my desk shatters. It almost looked like it had been shot with something. Again, I'm the only one who lived there. My windows were shut tight, so there was no way it was just the wind or a draft. I started getting very uncomfortable being alone in that apartment, and one weekend, I invited my girlfriend over to spend the night. I had been telling her about all the creepy things that had been happening, and she wanted to see if it was true. We eventually fall asleep in my bed, with no strange occurrences at all. I should note that my girlfriend rarely stays still when she's asleep. She tosses and turns all the time, and it can actually be quite annoying. Well, her me in the face late at night, which woke me. Annoyed that she did that, I sat up in bed to tell her off. But when I sat up, I saw that my girlfriend was sitting at the very edge of my bed, her back facing me and her head bent down, sort of like she was crying. I reached out to her and asked her if everything was okay when she got up and walked out the door. Seconds later, I heard glass smashing. That's when I looked back to my side and noticed that my girlfriend was laying there fast asleep. I woke her up and told her we're leaving now and going to her place. The next week, I moved into a different apartment nearby, and what do you know, all of that weird shit stopped. I really don't believe in ghosts or the paranormal, but for the life of me, I cannot explain what I experienced at that apartment. It was hands down the scariest thing that's ever happened to me. In the beginning of last year, I moved into this old farmhouse out in Wyoming. It's a big rancher-style house with acres of land and trees. The house is pretty old. I believe it was built in the early 1900s. It has that old country-style charm you'd see in movies. It's very secluded, which was one of the main reasons I bought it. But the only problem was the attic. Not too long after I moved in, I'd hear these strange noises coming from up there. It was like something was shuffling around. The attic was right next to my bedroom, and one weekend I decided to go up there to see what was making that noise. My first concern was there was a lock on the attic. I guess I didn't do my due diligence when I bought the house, because I did not notice this. I'd grabbed bolt cutters and my flashlight. I busted the lock and pulled down the attic stairs. I get up there, and the first thing I noticed was the snake skins. Hundreds of snake skins were dangling from the ceiling in the attic. I tried as bravely as I could to investigate the entire attic. Besides the creepy-ass snake skins, there were boxes and old furniture up there. After I checked the entire attic, I pretty much brushed off the shuffling noises I'd been hearing as the house settling, or maybe some critters up there. But then, things got even weirder. A few days after my first visit up there, I installed new light bulbs. I had noticed they were broken, but every time I'd go back up and check, they'd be busted or shattered. It was super weird. I even had an electrician come out to check the wiring, and they said everything was fine, and they couldn't explain the issue. And the shuffling noises would continue, especially at night. I'd wake up and hear it. It was like someone almost dragging their feet, as if they were walking back and forth in the attic. It got to the point where I installed a new lock and pad on the attic because I was seriously getting freaked out. Then one night, I woke up to a super loud bang, like it sounded as if something huge had fallen over from the attic. I go up to the attic, only to find that the attic door was wide open, and the steps were pulled down. Again, I make sure this is locked every night. It would be impossible for someone to unlock it without the key. I was actually so scared, I felt like a hopeless child. The next morning, I contacted a priest and explained what was going on. Father Durham came out to my ranch and blessed my entire house. And guess what? There's been no more incidents. All noises coming from the attic stopped. I consider myself a religious man, and I truly believe something evil or sinister was up in that attic. If you guys ever find yourself in a similar situation, I recommend calling a priest. I've been able to live in peace ever since.